Good Friday morning. Thoughts from the car. So yesterday I saw somebody post about the need to prove themselves. And it got me thinking about how so often we are living to prove ourselves instead of living to just be ourselves. Why are we so focused on striving for that external rather than the internal? And so I want to go over today, like the problems with trying to prove ourselves rather than trying to just be ourselves for self-worth. So the underlying belief that our worth is determined by other people's opinions or external validation is what leads us oftentimes to try to prove ourselves and strive rather than just being who we actually are. And this, the more we do it, the more this will leads us to the constant need of approval for every single thing that we do. Every single achievement, we need recognition. We need approval for every single decision we make, we need approval. And this will put us into a cycle that is completely unsustainable. Ask me how I know. Okay. So I have dealt with this for most of my adult life. And I would say probably in the last few years is when I finally have broken the cycle in many ways. And I still deal with perception sometimes, the heaviness of perception, and definitely still feel icky about it and find myself sometimes falling into that. I have to prove myself for my own self-worth. But there are so many problems for this. So first I want to go over what those problems are. So the first problem is that there becomes this unhealthy self-comparison with everybody, every single person you can think of. It doesn't matter who it is. When you are constantly in this place of trying to prove yourself for your own self-worth rather than just being who you are constantly trying to compare yourself with the person who's next to you. And this leads to feeling even more inadequate. The more you try to prove yourself to a group of people or a specific person or even to yourself through external validation, the more you're going to feel inadequate and the lower your self-esteem is going to become. Because here's the thing, there is always going to be someone who's better at something than you. There's always going to be someone who's going to achieve more than you. There is always going to be someone who's going to have more than you. And so when we compare ourselves to someone else, we are never going to receive the validation that we need to feel good about ourselves when we are comparing to others in unhealthy ways. I think this also ends up fostering a fear of failure. When we are constantly feeling pressure to succeed, we will create a fear of failure. And this will also bring a lot of limiting beliefs about ourselves, and it also limits our willingness to take risks, our willingness to step outside the box, our willingness to try things that might actually be our thing because we're afraid to fail, because we feel like we have to prove ourselves to everyone else. And so we don't actually ever attain success, which means fulfillment. That's what success truly is this fulfillment. And so we don't actually ever feel fulfilled because we are constantly in this place of failure, a fear of failing. Because we won't risk. And then the third thing I think that is a major problem with trying to prove ourselves for our self-worth is it brings so much stress and anxiety. With the constant pressure and the constant pursuit of a validation from others, we stress ourselves out because again, we can never meet the expectation perfectly that everybody's going to have for us. We are going to disappoint people. And so when we are looking for validation from others, we are going to feel completely stressed because what we feel loved, we feel supported, we feel our self-worth and value from what other people say and or think about us. Instead of just being who we are and embracing who we are. The fourth thing that comes out of when we are trying to constantly prove ourselves is we miss opportunities. Kind of already talked about this a little bit because when we focus on proving ourselves to others, we don't take those risks. And this prevents us from actually enjoying our present moment. And this ends up making us sometimes miss exploration. When we miss exploration, we miss the new opportunities. We miss new things that we might really be good at. And because we're so worried about what other people think, feel, we're always looking for the validation from someone else in order to feel like we're doing the right thing rather than following our own beliefs and values. And then I think the fifth thing is that it's just unsustainable. It's an unsustainable lifestyle because as we continue to try to achieve in order to receive validation from others for our own self-worth, is that it leads to where we just cannot sustain it. You're never going to have enough. If you're constantly trying to get the newest technology, you're buying the designer things, we see these as achievements. We see these as part of our value. We see this as part of our self-worth. It's going to create an unsustainable lifestyle, not just financially, but also mentally and emotionally, because we will never be able to completely do all the things. We're going to end up dropping one of the balls. And often that is we end up neglecting our health and we end up neglecting our physical health and our emotional health for the pursuit of these things or ideas or validation. So there's a huge difference though. There's a huge difference in proving ourselves and striving for that external validation and just being ourselves for fulfillment because of internal validation. So the proving ourselves involves, as I said, striving to meet others' external expectations and standards for us. And we do this in an attempt to gain their validation and their approval. But the power of being ourself is that being ourself involves embracing both our strengths and our weaknesses and the unique qualities that make us. That makes us the person that we are and the person we are becoming and the person we are unbecoming. And this is seeking our own internal validation without the need to conform to what society says or what someone else, even if they are super important to us, what they say about us. And this means that we accept the strengths and our weaknesses, and we end up pursuing our own path rather than trying to pursue a path that's not for us. And I think it's a reflection of each other. So if proving yourself is about external focus for external validation, then being yourself is about internal focus and an internal validation. And the external then is about being comparative and competitive with others. We compare ourselves to others and we are competing with others all the time, which means then that being ourself is where we embrace our authentic, unique self. And we're not comparing to others and we're not trying to, compete with others. We collaborate with others rather than. And then proving yourself would be the fear of failure, having the fear of failure, whereas being yourself is where you embrace imperfection. You embrace it. And it's not that we celebrate, that I'm not good at this thing, but we embrace it and we utilize that to build our relationships with those who are good with those things. And that's where the collaboration comes in. So, we surround ourselves with people who are really good at things that we aren't good at, that they have different strengths than we do. And we build our relationships upon that. And then when we are trying to prove ourselves, we're constantly in the state of trying to achieve. We're constantly striving to achieve, to reach that new height, that new thing. Whereas when we're just being ourselves, we are living fulfilled, embodied with our own personal growth. That's what brings us fulfillment. When we can see we have gone from point A to point B, rather than I need to get to point C because so-and-so's at point C. So we're not striving to achieve. We're not, comparing. We're not comparing lawns. We're not saying the Joneses have it better than us. It's not greener over there. Like we can just look at ourselves and go, oh, it's greener here because of the things that I'm doing for myself and I can validate myself. And when we're trying to prove ourselves, we are being limited by societal expectations. Rather than when we're being ourselves, we are free to express ourselves in our individuality. And this brings us more creativity. This brings us more freedom in general. And we're not so locked in by other people's validation and the externals. Okay, so I always like to give you guys like some practicals. So how do we break the cycle? Like how do we break the cycle and what can we practically do to make sure that we're not proving ourselves and we're just being ourselves? And how do we do that? Like where do I start? I think the first thing we have to do is we have to practice self-acceptance. And this means that we have to identify our weaknesses. We have to identify the weaknesses in certain areas of our life. If we're talking about our business, I just did a mastermind call with someone, my business coach for my business. And that was one of the exercises we did is we had to find the strengths and find the weaknesses in my business planning, in my business itself and in my business planning. Like, what am I really good at? What are my strengths towards building this business? And what are my weaknesses that I need help with, skills that I can build upon that to build my business? And that was a really good exercise because it made me become aware of things that maybe I wasn't aware of, good and the bad. And in this also meant I had to accept those things. I had to accept the things I was good at, which is sometimes really hard to do. And I had to accept the things that I'm not so good at and, seek help, reach out, find someone who is good at that. And this means also we have to practice self-compassion. We have to be compassionate on ourselves when we recognize that we're not good at something. And it's okay. We don't have to be good at everything because here's the thing. There's a lot of other people out there and we get to build relationships with people and find supportive people. And I think that's the second thing is that we have to surround ourselves with supportive people. We have to surround ourselves with those who appreciate us for who we actually are and what we actually bring to the table. And then we can in turn reflect to them and appreciate who they are and what they bring to the table. And it becomes copacetic and we build relationships that way. And that's what builds intimacy. That's what builds deeper relationships is when we can accept our weaknesses and our strengths and build upon them with one another. We get to collaborate with one another and build amazing things together. The third thing I would say is that we have to set authentic goals for ourselves. And what I mean by this is that we have to align our goals with our values and our beliefs. If we have a goal for ourselves that doesn't align with our values, we are never going to meet that goal because there's going to be something inside of us that is just going to stop us from actually attaining that thing because when we're in a healthy place, when we're in a healthy state, where our mind and our soul and our spirits and our body are just going to repel it. We're just going to say, that is not our value. And so we're not going to do all the things we need to do in order to actually attain that thing. And I think also this means that we aren't focused on our own personal growth when we're thinking about our goals. When we're thinking about authentic goals, then we are focused on our own personal growth, which here's the thing. It's not all about me when we're talking about personal growth, because here's the thing about personal growth. Personal growth and what we do for ourselves absolutely affects everyone around us. So when we are focused on our own personal growth, we're not being narcissistic. We're not about being about me. We are focused on the things that we need to heal in ourselves and the things that are weaknesses in ourselves so that we aren't hurting others, so that we can help others. And so that personal growth is super important, not just for self, but for the world in general, because we're just a piece of the puzzle. We are one little piece. And so we have to be focused on our own personal growth so that we can fit where we're supposed to fit to help create the puzzle, to help create it and collaborate and do the thing we were created to do to help the people we were created to help. And I think also part of setting authentic goals is also celebrating along the way our achievements that we have, those little things that we actually do achieve, the things that we are actually pursuing and doing well. Pursuing them and celebrating them along the way is totally a part of that. And it's a super important part of it. The fourth thing is we have to challenge those negative thoughts. We've talked a lot about this recently. Challenging those negative thoughts means that we have to ask ourselves, is this the truth? This thought that I have, is my brain being rude? Or is this something that I really do need to worry about? Or is this, my brain just being rude? And so we have to then replace that negative thought or that negative belief, limiting belief that we have about ourselves or a situation, and replace it with something that is true, and that is good and positive, and is something that's going to help us and others along the way. And then we have to practice mindfulness, putting ourselves in the present moment, seeing what is around us. I just was talking to a psychotherapist this morning on Threads. I had asked her the question, what questions can we ask ourselves to see if we're actually in presence, that we're actually practicing mindfulness? And she had a great list of questions of, what am I noticing around myself? What am I actually feeling? What is actually happening? What is actually happening? What is going on? And this just helps us put that in that present moment. And those were awesome questions. What are the feelings that I'm feeling when I'm in this moment? And they were awesome questions that really put you in your present moment rather than thinking about the future, thinking about the past, or comparing with someone else. And then I think we're on 5. The fifth thing is exploring our interests. We have to explore things that interest us. And this often can be the catalyst for finding our thing. And that was true for me, with coaching. I had really been doing coaching, I realized, for 15 years, group coaching for almost 20 years. And it was an interest for me. It's always been an interest for me, but I didn't know that that's what I was actually doing up until about a year or two ago. And so I started really exploring that and the interest of it, and really exploring the psychology of it, and using my degree in psychology to know how to research and to put all these things together for emotional healing and all those things in the last few years. And this helped me to express myself more creatively by writing books, by writing the guided experiences, by doing these videos, and actually doing the thing. And by exploring those interests, I found my purpose, and it's super exciting. And this gives us the self-esteem. This gives us that self-validation when we find our thing, and allows us to do the personal growth rather than worrying about that external validation from everybody else. Because we know we have a thing, we have a purpose, we know what our purpose is. And as always, the 2 things that I always mention that are practical things that we can do is we have to do self-care. We have to take care of ourselves. We have to take care of ourselves before we can take care of anybody else. And always be willing and open to receiving support, professional support. That means, it may be a counselor, it may mean a trained therapist, it may mean a coach, someone who helps you with the external things. So those are some of those practical things. And I think lastly, there are 3 questions that we can ask ourselves when we find ourselves in a situation where we're like, am I trying to prove myself? I think these are just 3 questions that we can ask ourselves. Are we in a season of proving ourselves, or are we just being? And the first question is, am I neglecting my needs for the pursuit of success, either in this situation, in this relationship, or just in general? That's a really good question. Am I neglecting my own needs for the pursuit of success, or being seen as successful by someone else? And the second question is am I focused on status symbols? Now, these are not always material things. These can be, a status symbol of motherhood is a really good one. Is are we trying to prove ourselves of being the best mom? I went through this for sure, especially when I was a stay-at-home mom. You put your identity in motherhood so very easily, and because that's what we do. That's what we are. When you're just a stay-at-home mom, that's your whole life. And so it's very easily for us to put our focus on the status symbol of motherhood, and a status symbol of our job, the title that we have, the status symbol of what we own, our home, our property, our cars, the status symbol of marriage, of our relationship. Are we focusing so much on what it looks like and how it's being perceived by others in order to receive that status symbol of, well, good job, you are successful? And then the third question is do I feel a sense of emptiness and dissatisfaction despite my achievements? And this is a really hard one and a really good question, because when we achieve something, meaning, we attain a goal or something, that a desire that we have, where, let's use motherhood as an example again. When we have our children, and that's the achievement for us, right? Are we still feeling dissatisfied in it? Are we feeling like we have an emptiness? If so, then that means that we're trying to prove ourselves, that we're trying to have that status symbol, that we're trying to, that we're probably neglecting our needs too, especially when we're talking about motherhood. So we can look at these things, we can ask ourselves these 3 questions to see if we are just in our state of being, or if we're trying to prove ourselves for our own self-worth. So your challenge is I want you to ask yourself these 3 questions, whether in general or a situation in your life. Maybe it's a relationship, maybe it's a circumstance that you're living in. These 3 questions, ask yourself. And if you find you don't like the answers, please reach out, DM me, we can talk about it. Or if you would like, you can always sign up at my website, BriannaLGeorge.com, for your bold beginning chat. So let me know, and have a fantastic Friday.